Good morning and welcome to the Angry Astronaut. So, a lot of news over the last couple of days, a lot of speculation, and perhaps a little bit of finger pointing, trying to determine exactly what might have gone wrong with all of this, how such a gross miscalculation was made as far as the resiliency of the launch facility for Starship, its ability to stand up under the not even full power of all of those Raptor engines, but about 90% power, and not of all the engines either. And during those 10 seconds when the engines were blasting again at nearly full power, it utterly ripped most of the launch facility to bits. I got a chance to see a great deal of the carnage myself. Amazingly, they opened up the beach and that area, which of course is a public highway, public beach, and so SpaceX, they kind of need to be good neighbors. They can't be closing down those roads indefinitely, so I got to see it all. And although I feel that Starship definitely has a future, and although I feel that Starship will ultimately become the rocket that takes us across the solar system, as I have mentioned many times in the past, Elon Musk's latest statement about 1 to 2 months or something along those lines before the next launch of Starship is absolute fantasy. The guy seriously needs a reality check, especially when you consider that he's seen all of this far more up close and personal than I did yesterday. So how long is it really going to be? Well, we're going to investigate all of that in just a moment. Oh, and once again, thank you so much for your support in getting me out here. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. Please like, please subscribe, hit those notification bells, and also please check the description for various ways to support my channel so I can keep bringing you these stories up close and personal from Boca Chica or wherever they may happen. All right, so just doing some free-handed camera work here. I really can't say with any sort of authority as to whether or not all this debris was something that was kicked out by the blast, but it does seem likely. This is just a lot of concrete fragments out here, just like an ocean of them. But once again, I mean, we're really close to the launch facility. So you can see something venting over there. That's something that is not typical. That's something that is not characteristic. And at some point I may get some information as to what that might be, but right now, venting something out of that. It appears to be underground. Well, I no longer have to speculate because, as you're going to see later on in the video, the launch through all kinds of concrete, far bigger than the chunks that you're looking at right now, far further away from the launch pad than I was when I began this self-guided tour. And by the way, I was chased away by SpaceX security when I got in front of the facility. I'm not really sure as to what sort of legal authority they have on the other side of the highway, Officially, they don't own that, but it may have been simply safety precautions that were enforced by the local sheriff's department. Regardless, I'm not really upset about all that because I got to see the full extent of the damage, and it is far more extensive than the debris you're looking at right now might indicate. What you're looking at here are some smaller chunks of concrete, some rebar, some aluminum, that sort of thing. By the way, the hopper took a serious hit. It's ruptured on one side now. Not sure if they're really going to try to repair that or not, or just kind of leave it as is as a reminder of what happened here in the past. And as far as what was venting, well, the underground plumbing system definitely took a lot of damage when Starship dug that massive crater underneath itself. And incidentally, this sign belonged on the other side of the road, so further evidence of just how much stuff got blown around by this launch. And once again, you're seeing just a tiny fraction of what I found on the opposite side of the pad later on. Visual evidence of the liftoff is pretty clear, but the tower doesn't appear to be as damaged as so many other things we've seen. The main thing, the main impact that we've observed thus far has been as a result of just the enormous amount of concrete that was lifted up and smashed to bits and scattered all over creation. And again, this is really close to the pad though, so this isn't as problematic as where some of the rest of this stuff may have ended up. Now, one of the most surprising things about this launch was the fact that it shouldn't have happened at all. The first sign of trouble was that 3 Raptor engines went out of service before liftoff could even transpire. That's something that should have triggered an abort immediately. It would have ended the launch of most other rockets, which are only released from the launch pad when all systems are nominal. They should have shut the rocket down completely at that point. However, they did not. Now, right there, at 30 seconds or so into the flight, you may have noticed an explosion at Super Heavy's base. Some have speculated that that was a hydraulic power unit, or HPU, exploding at an early point during the flight. At this point, Starship's fate was sealed if this was indeed the case, because with all of that hydraulic fluid being lost, its ability to separate was also lost, which means the best that we could hope for from Starship was to gain as much altitude as possible before it could be destroyed. But another very disturbing thing about this flight is the fact that once the rocket started tumbling, once it was clear that Starship had to be destroyed, it took 1 minute and 19 seconds for the flight termination charges to be triggered. It's difficult to determine whether or not this was a result of SpaceX decision making or if it was some kind of technical error. Either way, if this rocket had been going off course in a less ideal direction, say towards South Padre Island or Port Isabel, 1 minute and 19 seconds would have taken it into a very dangerous region where triggering the flight termination charges would have rained many tons of debris down on an inhabited region. Fortunately, this didn't occur, but it's something that's going to have to be taken into account and thoroughly analyzed before Starship can fly again. This is something that the government is no doubt going to be very heavily involved in. Although I am convinced that Starship would have performed far, far better if it had taken off from a proper launch facility that wasn't disintegrating underneath it and causing damage to the rocket. That really doesn't matter at this point. The FAA is going to want to see every single detail of this flight and exactly what the potential danger to the public actually actually was. And if it is determined that the public was, even theoretically, in any kind of danger, there's going to have to be a lot of substantial changes at Starbase before the FAA will even consider allowing this rocket to fly again. And if any of you are thinking that I'm being too hard on SpaceX, once again, I need to compare and contrast the flight of this rocket from the flight of SLS. Even though SLS did some damage to Mobile Launch Tower 1, and I released a couple of videos about the topic, at no point did this damage represent any threat to the rocket, nor did it impact its flight trajectory, nor did SLS present any sort of a danger to the public around Cape Canaveral. That, in my opinion, is not the case with this flight, and really, I don't see how Starship survived the maelstrom of debris that I found on the other side of the pad later on. This is not the kind of damage that we saw with SLS. SLS did not do this kind of spread this kind of damage, and I was partially critical actually of the unexpected damage that SLS did to ML1, Mobile Launch Tower 1, and so I'm going to be correspondingly harsh on any damage, unexpected or otherwise, that took place here as well. Interesting. This is definitely, that's a bracket that I believe one uses to, I've seen brackets similar to that used to hold the heat tiles on. Not exactly sure what purpose that bracket may have served. If it was on the launch tower or on the, or elsewhere. But remarkable indeed. Again, as expected, concrete fragments all over the damn place. Now, some work being done, or at least people going close to the OLM, but there is nobody on it, as I have seen. No evidence of anybody on the OLM whatsoever. Interesting, kind of disconcerting noises coming from the facility every now and then. And another thing I noticed were the SpaceX employees themselves. Their emotions ranged anywhere from emotionless or perhaps a little bit shell-shocked to downright hostile, especially the security personnel. Now, I get that. I understand why these people don't want inquisitive journalists like myself or tourists or whatever to be checking out the facility that they worked so hard on over the last several years. A facility that was ripped to shreds in the space of a mere 10 seconds. I can understand their emotions, but I didn't see any evidence of SpaceX employees trying to do any work, trying to effect any sort of repairs, and definitely nobody on the tower or the OLM. But one thing is clear, Elon Musk has completely lost his sense of objectivity. If he really thinks that this facility can be suitable for launching another rocket in 1 to 2 months. The people I saw seemed to have no idea where to start. I certainly wouldn't have. Alright, so now we're getting ourselves out close to the beach itself. The interesting question is going to be just how much managed to make its way this far. As you can see, we got people surveying the tidal flats. That all the way out there. Again, a substantial distance. Be interested to see. Again, more rebar again, I would be very surprised if this was here as a result of anything else. It just doesn't make sense to have tons of concrete and rebar this far out from the road. And again, this appears to be a very sizable chunk of concrete that half buried itself on impact. You can see this thing is enormous. At least if it were to hit you. And of course, once again, nobody would be foolish enough to be this close. But we're a long ways away at this stage. And we are still finding evidence of. Continue to look, another piece half buried on impact. Not nearly as big as the last one, but still pretty damn sizable, and yet nature is still surviving undeterred in the face of all of this destruction, as it is wont to do. Another reason that I believe that life has found a way to survive throughout the solar system, regardless of how hostile things might be. What do we have here? That almost looks like the lid of a... Well, I thought it was the lid to a cooler. Yeah, that's been there for a while, obviously, though it's got barnacles and things like that on it. So that is not... As you can see here, people come out here and wreck this beach of their own accord. They do a lot of that. And they deserve at least as much harassment for what they do. I mean, look at the evidence of this party and all these shattered bottles and remains of plastic and God knows what else. Concrete becoming less common, but once again, unquestionably here. And not really small. Once again, tossed a considerable distance away, but well within the exclusion zone. Definitely safe as far as humans are concerned. Not quite so much for others. There's definitely more concrete as to just how much and whether or not all of that came from the launch is difficult to say. So I would say there's a lot of reason to believe that beachcombers have gone over this area very thoroughly. Very, very thoroughly, in fact. So I would say there's a lot of reason to believe that we're not going to find a great deal out here, which is, again, unfortunate that if there is any damage, if there are, any pieces of debris that got out this far, we're not finding a whole lot of evidence of it. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and make our way back. So I've just heard from a couple of sources that they're looking maybe at July. Once again, I feel that that is absolutely impossible, at least if they're going to launch responsibly. And frankly, if the FAA allows another launch without extensive precautions having been taken, and I don't see how you do this safely without a flame trench. If the FAA just allows it anyway, then I must confess I will have serious doubts about their integrity as an organization. It's almost as if they know that we need Starship for Artemis 3, and they're willing to allow Starship to do whatever is necessary to get it to orbit, no matter what kind of damage it causes. And that, of course, is unacceptable. They need to call upon the many, many years of experience that NASA has with launching these things. And of course, they have many former NASA employees, NASA engineers, who are out there. You need to call on that experience to make this as safe as possible. What's good news is I haven't seen any evidence of dead animals, little lizards scurrying about, having survived all of this. Again, demonstrating the resilience of life, its ability to survive just about anything. Hey, little guy. Hey, little guy. Its ability to get through just about any experience and come out unscathed, which again makes me think that we have life throughout the solar system that has also survived hostile conditions. Now, nothing that happened over the last few days would be very problematic if Starship wasn't working under any kind of a timetable, and even though SpaceX very much needs Starship in order to deploy their upgraded version 2 Starlink satellites, Artemis is going to no doubt suffer significantly as a result of what happened recently. The test flight of a skeleton Starship, an unmanned Starship, shall we say, with perhaps an incomplete life support system, was supposed to originally take place next year, 2024. That now seems to be obviously impossible. In addition to that, there were problems with Starship from the beginning as a lunar lander. It doesn't have the capability, for example, to carry out an abort maneuver the way most types of lunar landers can. If anything significant goes wrong with lunar Starship on its way down to the lunar surface, the astronauts are plain out of luck. NASA's decision to go with a single HLS solution, which of course was forced by Congress, given the fact that Congress wasn't allowing enough funding for 2 competing missions, or really a more expensive single mission, is now becoming very problematic indeed. It's obvious that Starship is going to have a significant problem trying to make any sort of deadlines when it comes to landing on the moon, when it comes to test flights, when it comes to refueling in orbit. And right now, I think the people at NASA who made that fateful decision to go with one solution for landing on the moon are now no doubt starting to regret that choice, because if they had gone with the Alpaca from Dynetics or even the national team solution, which were much more straightforward, required a lot less refueling, and most importantly, did not rely on the most powerful rocket in human history that clearly requires an extremely resilient launch facility to even take off in the first place, they would have been on a much better track to landing on the moon in 2025 or 2026. For all the problems that Blue Origin had with its lander, it was more straightforward, more conventional, and more feasible. Even though Starship is undoubtedly the better long-term solution, it is going to take a significant amount of time to put this thing on the moon, especially given the current circumstances. And Elon Musk's current statement about using some sort of water-cooled flame diverter instead of a flame trench, he seems to still be trying to avoid that scenario. Well, that is a serious problem. The only way that something like that might be able to work is if it has a lot of water at its disposal and a lot of water pressure. In other words, a very big water tower, which they don't currently have at this facility, or a very large pumping station, which they also don't have at this facility. You cannot get a structure like that approved and built built in 1 to 2 months. And of course, you're starting to see some evidence of just how massive some of these pieces of debris were and how far away from the pad they actually got. The notion that you can somehow make a launch facility resilient enough to take this much punishment from a rocket this powerful without using everything that NASA has had at its disposal to keep rocket launches safe at Cape Canaveral is just completely misguided. You're going to have to repair all the underground damage, fill in all the holes, patch all the concrete, put in a flame trench, and install a better deluge system with a much better water supply. And that's assuming that there's no extensive damage to the OLM, and we really can't be certain about that yet. I'm not even sure if SpaceX knows a lot about it because none of their personnel were anywhere really near it. The punch list to get this facility launch ready again and safe for a second launch of Starship is simply staggering. So how long is it going to take? Well, it's tough for somebody like me to estimate, but given the amount of time it took to build this facility in the first place, and given all the things that obviously need to be replaced and all of the improvements that have to be made, I think it will be a miracle if Starship can launch again before the end of the year. And also, a successful orbital test is only the first step. Starship also needs to master low Earth orbit refueling and also the process of getting out to the moon, entering low lunar orbit, setting down on the moon safely, and then taking off. I don't see how, in the name of God, Starship, even on an unmanned test, is going to be able to do that before 2026 or 2027, which pushes out Artemis 3 at the earliest to sometime in 2028, unless NASA finds some funding for a second alternative right now. Smash that like, hit that subscribe. Please check the description for various ways to support this content. And by the way, a complete collection of all the photos that I took out at this facility are available on my Discord server to my Patreon supporters who made this amazing experience possible. And as always, guys, stay angry about space.